Butch stood on the range at the halfway point trying to think of something to say to Tiger that would change it around. Butch turned around to him and goes, "Look at her, she's laughing and joking, she thinks this is done, you show her who's boss." Tiger pulled the match back, got level with 2 to go, and Butch is walking ahead up to the 17th tee, and as Tiger's walking up, he slaps him on the backside and goes, "She ain't laughing now, Butchie, is she?" And he just keeps striding.
What separates the people that keep leveling up from the ones who hit a wall or a plateau and never really break through?
The mentality of all of them is just extreme, and they're willing to do stuff that others just aren't.
And I think that delusion is necessary and it gets you in the game, but then experience slaps you in the face and says, you know what, there are levels to this, right?
I remember genuinely thinking at some point I'll try and beat Tiger Woods, head to head. And I look at it now and I'm like, that was never going to happen.
The consistency and discipline is one thing. The fire in the belly is a whole other thing. And then things change, right? Circumstances change, and you may not be the same person, or you may not want the same things. But then you often find new ways to find that flow.
I think whenever you've had a big setback, effectively, you've just got to move forward in some way. Now, the forward might not be what the forward was last week, but forward is forward. And one arm over the other, one pedal over the other, one foot over the other. I said, you'll reach the finish line.
Jamie.
Darren.
How are you?
Very good. Excited.
So quick question for you. Let's start off with, every great coach has that one moment where it's the fork in the road, where they could have gone one way, but instead they chose the harder, the more meaningful path. So tell us, and for our listeners, what was that moment for you? When did you realize that coaching wasn't just something you were good at, but it was something that you were meant to do? And why coaching instead of just chasing success as a player?
I think my fork in the road probably came more down the path of just golf in general to begin. And I always go back to a funny story in my last year of school, which was when my career guidance counselor effectively pulled me into his office and said that you can't apply for these courses because I had simply picked the 10 most unachievable courses in the Irish college system, which were physically not possible for me to get at the time, given my academics. And because we have to sign off on the papers, he had no choice but to try and convince me otherwise and to pick a course that was more achievable. But the whole reason behind doing that was basically to give me no way out down a golf route. So I had told my parents and I had told him that I was just going to play golf for a living. And at the time, my mother was not overly impressed. My family were not overly impressed, but again, as I kind of said to you, I just kind of winged it, and that led me down golf. And my initial plan was to be a player. It wasn't to be a coach initially. That basically happened after about 3 years of trying to play for a living and being a massive failure. And it's funny now, as you get to know some of the players that are the best in the game, where I am now, I kind of look at them and just wonder how the heck I ever thought I could even compete with them. Because at 17, 18, 19, I remember genuinely thinking at some point I'll try and beat Tiger Woods, head to head. And I look at it now and I'm like, that was never going to happen. But everything that happened along the way kind of got me to where I am now. So I still find it funny bringing it up with my mum, because my mum loves travel and all of this. And she just hates how much that making that decision, which at the time was I'll use inverted commas, wrong decision, has ended up bringing me all these kind of cool places. So I got quite lucky with that kind of bit of stubbornness, which has kind of carried me through from there.
Just curious about the path not taken, Jamie. What courses were the most unachievable courses in your program? Why did you choose them?
It's particularly funny now because I remember the first 2 or 3 were it was law in Trinity, which is basically the Irish version of Harvard. It was be a doctor, and the way the Irish system works is you get 100 points per subject. You've got 6 subjects that you can count, and all of these courses were pretty much, I think, 590 plus points. I always laugh because I think my 8th or 9th one was psychology in somewhere, and it's funny that I'm now back doing a sports psychology master's. So it's a bit ironic. When I told my mum I was doing a master's, she got quite upset. She was quite proud. So, but yeah, they were kind of the high. I literally picked the top top 10 courses I could find that I was just never going to get.
Well, the reason why I ask is because it seems like there's some high achievement and ambition that's kind of embedded in you. And so the deeper question is, okay, did that start like super early on, or was that found on the path, or was that fire in the belly always there? Because I mean, not everybody goes for the hardest thing and then decides to be a golf pro after, right?
I think a lot of it came from my parents because I grew up just watching them work. Like they were really hard workers, really good business people, and just learned a lot from them. Like it was, I remember getting up at 5 o'clock to go into my dad's garage and like sit for 3 hours before school. And at the time, I hated it. And I find it ironic now that like 5 a.m. is like a normal start time here to go and train or go and ride or do whatever. And yeah, I think back to like sitting on the couch in the garage and basically just to myself cursing him for getting me out of bed when everybody else could just sleep in. And I think it just formed from that hard work was normal and this is just what you have to do. And I was quite lucky in a way because despite them getting like by the time I was 15, 16, they were quite well off, but they never let me realize it. So if I wanted a pair of trainers, it was like, okay, that's 8 hours work in the garage. Or else I would have to go out and use another job that I'd done in the golf club, which was helping the pro and like make the money somehow, whether it was changing grips or repairing golf clubs or collecting the range balls. So it was never really given to me, even though they kind of had it to give. But I was quite lucky in that they never really just gave it to me on a plate.
Yeah, I'm listening to your story, and I feel like every 17-year-old should feel like they're designed for greatness, and honestly, like everyone should feel that or think that way, right? And I think that delusion is necessary, and it gets you in the game, but then experience slaps you in the face and says, you know what, there are levels to this, right? And I love the fact that you basically had this. The real gold in what you said was the pivot. I think the pivot was key because you realized, okay, maybe I can't be Tiger, but I can create tigers, and that's the move, right?
Yeah, like it was almost accidental for me because effectively I had just run out of money. I had maxed out every loan I could get from a bank. Like physically, they just would not give me any more money, and I was so in debt. And I had a son very young, Scott, and like you're kind of at this crossroads where you're like, okay, you've got your dream that you really want to follow, which is golf, and then you've got a son which you really need to take care of, and you've got no money to pay his bills, and you're like, I kind of got to go make some money. So I just began a golf job to begin that was intended to, one, cover costs, and then two, give me enough money to get back on the road. And it was in that journey that I kind of found coaching and just fell in love with it and fell in love with it quick and just realized that this is quite fun. Like you get to make people better every time and you get such a dopamine hit every time someone improves. It's just, it's not really work. I think that was kind of the first realization because I remember running a golf club in Ireland called New Forest, which, everybody there was just great. Like the members were great. I was somehow running the golf club at a very young age and I gradually drifted into more and more and more teaching. And I was just like, I don't really want to do anything other than teaching. I hate the management side of it and I don't like the organization stuff. But I love the teaching stuff and I just stay out in the practice area all day with the members. So I kind of fell into that, and then that to me was kind of the beginning. It was that golf club specifically that just made me really enjoy teaching and really thought I could do something with it.
Beautiful. So you've worked with everyone. You've worked with complete newbies to elite pros, and I'm sure that you've seen it 100 times over and over. Some people just they just keep getting better, while others stay stuck in the same loop for years. So it's the same everywhere. I mean, you look at business and fitness, even parenting to a certain extent, right? Some families raise kids who grow into, super curious, very resilient, independent thinkers, and others don't, right? So the kids never quite develop that spark, the same potential, and they basically get different outcomes. So how is it that, some parents get different outcomes from their kids, or these kids get different outcomes from others? Like what's the difference maker? Like what separates the people that keep leveling up from the ones who hit a wall or a plateau and never really break through?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, especially with kids, because I don't know. I always feel like, and it's something I regret saying sometimes, but I definitely believe with a lot of the better kids, there's a pushy parent a little bit behind them. Now, the level of that pushiness is an absolute knife edge. That I've seen the level of pushiness go too far to where it creates the most extreme anxiety at 15, 16, 17 as you'll ever see. I've seen it to where it's just about handled and that child progresses to be in one of the best college teams in the USA. And then I've seen it to where there's absolutely no push at all and kids can kind of fall out. And I don't think that's the only variable, but I definitely think there has to be something within the child driving them.
Hmm.
Um, and more often than not, I definitely think there is a little pushiness from one parent. And I think it's actually a good thing to have one pushy parent and one easy parent is actually a pretty good balance because you get one that the child just wants to make really, really happy and just wants to achieve something for. And then the other one's there when it's not going well and can kind of put the arm around. And it's something I've seen that's strangely successful. But if I'm honest, I don't fully understand it. And then I just think you get some kids who I suppose who see it and just kind of want it and just go after it, but that's far more internal as well. And I would say that's rarer. I would say there's definitely more often than not, it's the influence of parents in some way that really helps them. And I suppose if you think back, like even just me thinking back to my own one, it's like they weren't pushy towards me. They hardly ever seen me even hit a single shot. I think my mum seen me hit one shot before. My dad hasn't seen me hit any shots.
Mm.
But they were I won't say pushy in the traditional sense, but me looking at how successful they were in business made me want to be good at something to kind of impress them. And in a way, I almost never did because they didn't really care about golf. Do you know what I mean? It was never like or sport in general. It was never at the forefront of our family, really. And my grandmother was actually the one who was big into sport, into football, and she kind of was the one who was just always there, like nonstop. Brought me around the country to different events, to teams that I made it on to. And again, there's just those different things in the background, like wanting to impress two parents, wanting to make my granny proud. You know, you kind of have it's like a cauldron of just different, I suppose, emotions and drives and kind of, yeah, it's a little bit of a mix, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Every parent thinks that they're doing the right thing, right? They sign
Yeah.
up the kid for coaching, push them to practice,
Yeah.
maybe even drop a few motivational one-liners like hard work beats talent before a
Yeah.
big game. But from where you sit, what's something that you're what do you think parents could do more of, or maybe even less of, um, to actually help their kids develop that mindset, the mindset that they need to not just be successful in sport but also in life?
I think the biggest thing I would say is the awareness of what to do.
Mm.
Because I really don't think, I don't think there's a rule. And I think it's understanding where your child is at what point. And it's very similar. It's the same as coaches, right? Like you could say parents, you could say coaches, but it's knowing where a child is at what point and then knowing what the ingredient that you need to add is. So, like, if they're feeling really down about something, whether it be sport or life, you know, kicking them isn't going to help. Do you know what I mean? And
Really?
equally,
Does
yeah,
it? That's a hot
and,
take.
and then equally, if they're riding high and they're like on this, just upward trend and they're maybe getting a bit cocky, like it could be a good thing to give them a little bit of a kick and like bring them down a peg or two. But it's just knowing it, and it's such a judgment call, and it's very difficult to say it. But I definitely think it's an awareness thing. And that, like I say, it goes for coaches and parents. Like I've made bad calls with that in the past and said the wrong thing to the wrong child at the wrong time, and it's ended badly. But then equally, when you say the right thing and you see it actually make a positive influence, it's amazing to see what can happen off the back of it. Like, and I always think of the old Butch story. Like Butch Harmon was a coach that I used to work for, and he's generally known as like the best in the world, or the best ever. And he coached Tiger for a long, long time. But when Tiger was an amateur and he was probably 17, 18, he was going for, actually, he was probably a little older, he was probably 20. He was going for his third, basically, major amateur title in a row. And after halfway, which was 18 holes at the time, he was losing quite badly to a relative unknown called Steve Scott. And he was getting beaten quite heavily. And Butch stood on the range at the halfway point trying to like think of something to say to Tiger that would change it around. And he looked over at Steve, and Steve's girlfriend was in the bag. And as you would if you're 5 up, she was chuckling away, having a laugh, all bubbly. And Butch turned around to him and goes, "Look at her. She's laughing and joking. She thinks this is done. You show her who's boss." And Tiger went off, thought nothing of it. Butch thought nothing of it. Tiger pulled the match back, got level with 2 to go. And Butch is walking ahead up to the 17th tee, and as Tiger's walking up, he slaps him on the backside and goes, "She ain't laughing now, Butchie, is she?" And he just keeps striding. And I'm just like, it's like like Butch is known for that. He's known for just like the right thing at the right time.
Yeah.
I think when you're dealing with kids, especially, it's like it's just being able to read the situation and being able to look at them and go, do they need a hug or do they need a kick? And or is it somewhere in between?
Well, I'm glad you brought up Tiger because he's a really good example. And like you mentioned, Darren, there are levels to this, right? There's the nudge, or there's like perfecting the stroke and things like that you do on the day to day. But what do you guys think of this take of Tiger's father actually believing that he was our Lord and Savior? I mean, talk about planting an embedded seed like super early on. Like he truly believed this. And I just watched the HBO documentary not too long ago, but he really believed that. So what if, his father would have said right before that and said, "Hey, you are our Lord and Savior. You got to hit this shot." I wonder how much influence that actually had. So as a master's in psychology, what do you think about that kind of parenting?
It's extreme. To be honest, I think with I would say most of the elite of the elite of the elite, like the complete outsiders, which Tiger is, and you could rank like Michael Jordan in it, you could probably rank Lance Armstrong in it, and you could pick, a bundle of others from different sports. But
Tom Brady, yeah.
They tend to be on the extreme end of everything, right? And whether that comes from young childhood with Tiger, where, obviously dad's a Green Beret, even through Tiger's golfing career, was doing Navy SEAL training, which is just wild to me as somebody who ended up with back problems and knee problems and all that. I think that the mentality of all of them is just extreme, and they're willing to do stuff that others just aren't. As I said, for some people, it's done from a very, very young, early age, and then with others, they discover it. Like I would say Tom Brady's probably a little more extreme in terms of later he started to do it. But yeah, I think it's completely unique. But there's definitely extremes to the people and what they do. And I think, from the little bit of insider info I have on Earl and Tiger, it was bred like everything he did from the moment he came out. He was primed to be one thing and one thing only, which ended up, in a sense, in his life sense, probably biting him a bit later on with all the stuff that you've probably seen in the HBO documentary. But, that's kind of the payoff, right? It's a trade-off between normality and being just the best ever. And I think probably the other end of that is someone like Rory. Like, I think Rory had probably the talent of Tiger, but didn't want the extreme of what Tiger had to do to get it.
Yeah. As a parent, most people think motivation is a switch for kids. Like one day a kid's basically going to decide that, I'm going to be great. Doesn't work that way. It's usually this tiny seed planted way earlier. So it's funny you mentioned, and it's very subtle that they don't even realize it, the kids. And you see it not just with Tiger. I mean, with Tiger, his dad used to whisper in his crib, "You'll be the greatest golfer ever." It's documented. His dad used to do that. Serena Williams, her dad had this 78-page plan before she was even born.
Yeah.
And we can even look in business. Like you look at Elon, his mom used to tell him stories about how he was destined to be really great. So, these seeds, when repeated enough, they stop being ideas and they become someone's identity.
Yeah. And the Williams are a really interesting example because like the thing I never realized until that movie came out, and I was fortunate enough to meet Will Smith after that as well, but like they weren't allowed to play junior tournaments, which I find the most absolute bizarre thing in the world because they never get to hit the levels on the way up or figure out where they lie. It was just train for 6, 7, 8 years straight, and then you're going pro. And it's like you've no idea what you're playing against. And like the extreme of what he did to those two girls in terms of mentality and building them up and also keeping them away, like the decision was made to keep them away from the negativity that surrounded the junior tournaments is just amazing. Like for somebody who in sport who knows various different things about it, it's like it just amazes me that a parent was strong enough to make that decision because that's a huge chunk to take out, right, of development and learning and even friendship. It just
Yeah.
amazed me that.
It's a lot. There's a lot of pressure as well, right? I mean, some kids can handle it, and most can't. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just a
Yeah.
lot of pressure, and it's basically subconscious programming that's happening, right? And I mean, let's say a 5-year-old hears that a kid, 5-year-old kid hears, you're a genius at solving problems. I mean, they won't wake up at 20 and remember that exact phrase, but guess what? At 20, when they hit a tough problem, their subconscious whispers, we will figure things out, because those seeds grow roots. And maybe not today, but next year, at some point, that idea, if it's deep enough, it will always find its way to manifest.
Yeah.
That's what I've seen time and time again.
Well, can we talk about the inverse of that, Jamie? Because it's just as important to talk about the people that have that negative mindset, right? Like
Yeah.
the parents that have instilled early on that, oh, you'll never amount to anything, or you have no talent, or, it's very toxic, obviously.
Yeah.
In your experience, who are the kids, or it could even be adults, that have kind of broken through some of these mental roadblocks that have seen very, very kind of crystallized in their minds, right? Because what we are talking about is mindset planted early on, and then the evolution of that mindset and how that materializes in how you grow.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because you don't hear about them as often, right? And I don't know if that's because less of them come through because of that initial kind of chat, or they just don't talk about it when they do break through and stuff like that. Like, you do see guys who've had, I suppose, a negative path in other ways. Like, I think Bradley Wiggins is probably one of the examples where he suffered abuse and stuff, and a lot of what he did was just probably in anger and trying to escape, all the stuff he was going through at the time. And I think, like, when he talks about it, it's amazing, and it's just sad to hear how much he actually didn't like cycling, and now still doesn't, even though his son is getting into it. But I think when you have those things, like a negative, any kind of negativity in your upbringing, especially, I think you need some sort of positive in there, or it eventually will burn out. Do you know what I mean? Because you're kind of doing it. I think doing it in anger can be good for a while,
Yeah.
but if you don't at some point flip that switch, it just burns you out, right? Like, there's no positivity to what you're doing every day. So as soon as things start to go well, you're just like, you come up with another reason to try and just make it angry. And I think that's a really limited way of motivating yourself. And like, I've even found it in triathlon. Like, I suppose when I started doing longer distance stuff, it was probably in a way to run away from things that I was going through in my own life. But then 3-4 years in now, and it's like everything's just about friendship. Like, I don't really care about the times as much. Even at the T100 a couple of months ago, I actually waited for one of my friends. He was a couple of seconds behind me, and it was just so we could run out of transition together, because I knew I'd never be with him on the rest of the run. So I was just like, it's cool to do it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, and 3 years ago, I never would have thought of that. It was all about like just time, and go as fast as you can and go as hard as you can. And I suppose, like, again, that's just how my switch kind of gradually changed with that. And now I just enjoy doing it. I just enjoy having a coffee ride or going for breakfast with friends after. And I think, like I say, going back to the original question, I think when you get that negativity in an extreme level, let's say if it was with a parent, I think some kids are lucky enough that maybe they get a coach that is the buffer, if you want. So, like, is the kind of safe space or the safe zone that they feel. And again, like, sometimes if you get the balance of that right, it can be a bit of a driver, because they're like, okay, they want to impress the parents, but they also have the safe spot. But I think if it's only on one side and it's all negative, like if you have a parent who's really pushy, or two parents, and then you've got a coach who's really pushy, and you're just in an angry, negative space all the time, I think you'll probably get through a bit, but there's definitely going to be some sort of underlying anxiety or tension or something later on that comes up. And I've kind of seen that with a couple of kids before, where they reach 17, 18, 19, and their awareness is going up, and they're just a bag of nerves half the time.
Yeah. I want to switch gears and talk about how to think and train like a pro. So you've worked with professionals, and a lot of people think that they're grinding, but really they're just putting in hours and there's no progress, right? It's like the guy who who's just putting in hours and hours, but there's no progress. You could be in the driving range. I remember when I used to play golf, I just used to hit ball after ball after ball after ball. And a week would go by and I actually didn't really get any better. And I was just reinforcing the same bad habits over and over. So how is it that best amateurs treat practice? Like you said this in one of your, I think it was one of your blogs I read. You said the best amateurs treat practice like a pro would. So how would you coach someone who thinks that they're improving, but in reality, they're just spinning their wheels?
I think the biggest thing is to have a purpose to what you're going to do. And by that, I mean, practice you can make really, really hard. You can make it really, really easy and anywhere in between. So I suppose it's knowing what you're trying to achieve out of a session. So, and this has actually come up recently with one of my students. If you look at, like, let's say a week, if you go in just looking for 10 out of 10 on difficulty the entire week with whatever tasks you've given yourself, you're probably going to be just drained by the end of it. It'd be like doing a run at just full blast every single day for a week. Equally, if you do it at a 1 out of 10 difficulty, like something that's just so easy that it's like brain dead, you're not engaged at all. So what we tried to do with her was we tried to basically isolate each day as to what we wanted to achieve in terms of difficulty or what the task was. So some days we'd have pre-planned, like maybe they were skill-oriented tasks, so like trial and error stuff, just having a little bit of a play around, test it, be willing to fail at stuff, be willing to mess it up. Other days we would have technical stuff, and then other days we would have performance stuff. And when we do performance stuff, we would really try and dial in like difficulty level. So we have like a selection of games and challenges and things that we do. And what I wanted her to figure out with the skill stuff is, okay, well, where does the difficulty lie? And then as we come into certain sessions, we would go, okay, we want this to be a mentally tiring session. Like we actually want you to really get frustrated, get annoyed. So like we might program the absolute hardest game. But then on a day where we're more focused on technical, we might just have some simple maintenance drills that are purely based on getting a line, getting your posture right, getting your mechanics right. So it kind of, I think the biggest thing is going in with a bit of intention into every session. And you can probably relate that across all sports. Like obviously you've done Ironman before. It's like, okay, is this like a zone 2 ride? Just nice and chill, nice and easy, keep a little bit of intensity, go long. Or is this a speed session where it's like, right, 10 out of 10 for 2 minutes? And you have to put in everything you have for those 2 minutes, and then you get to ease off, and then you go again. The intention is much clearer, I find, in sports that have time or RPE associated to it versus the difficulty about something like golf, or if you were to take like snooker, or even I suppose American football for like a quarterback. It's like, okay, do you want guys just running at you softly where you don't have to actually unload the ball quickly? Or, okay, do you want your teammates actually, they're going to smash you if you don't get rid of this ball? Do you know what I mean? Like, so it's defining what the limits are on that day just based on what you want to achieve out of it. So we do a lot of that again with kind of, I suppose, some journaling. And she'll review a session. She'll go, okay, I wanted to hit 7 out of 10. It was a little easier than I thought. It was a 5 out of 10. So then the next time I need a 5 out of 10, I'll take that game and I'll input it into that day. But it's really good just for kind of, this is the goal, this is what I felt, okay, review, use that again, or don't use that again.
How does that carry over to for entrepreneurs? How can they use what we know from sport and apply it to entrepreneurship?
I think the biggest thing I've seen that's a carryover is probably the willingness to try something. Do you know what I mean? Like being like, I looked at the Amazon dramatized documentary that was on the plane a couple of weeks ago, and it was like the willingness to try and change a color on a screen or change a button or where it was, and just try stuff. Just literally try. Okay, that worked. Great.
Experiment, basically.
Yeah, 100%. Because I think the guys who are really successful, like they'll all talk about failing, right? Like the amount of times that they failed at something. And I think that's the thing. You see that across all the sports. Has been willing to fail. You go Kipchoge in the 2 hour, like he failed the one at Monza first and then he got it right second time round. And equally with businesses, like you make a decision and you go with it. And I think the really, really good, successful guys just go and they don't really think. They almost are a bit throw caution to the wind and hope for the best and kind of figure it out later on. And if they mess it up, and they'll probably get something from it. They're not going to take nothing from a mess up. even if it runs them down a bit, but they'll come back from it. And then the next decision they make is a bit more informed. So it's kind of using those mistakes to inform the next decision and hope that that one's right.
So to be really intentional, I guess, with the approach and to experiment. And I
Yeah.
think the biggest mistake people make is they expect every day to feel the same.
Yeah, which it doesn't. It's definitely, I think that goes for everybody, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's days you wake up and you just feel great, and then there's days you wake up and you just don't want to do it. But I suppose that's where you fall
Okay.
to, but that's where you fall. I think you fall to, the level of your processes. It's like, it's been, again, I suppose it comes back to awareness, which is probably a bit of a recurring theme a lot of the time is like, okay, are you just not motivated today? At which point, okay, go out and do it, not motivated. Are you a bit tired? At which point, go out and do it a bit tired. But then there's days where really maybe the tiredness is too much and it's just, okay, stay in bed for an extra hour.
Yeah.
But it's knowing what is your mind just playing a bit of a trick on you and going, okay, go on, stay a bit longer. And then what is actually necessary. So like you can probably hear my voice, my nose is a little bit blocked up the last couple of days. And I said to my girlfriend, I was like, yeah, I'm taking 2 days off training. She goes, thank God. I'm like, why do you say that? And she goes, because you will never do that. But it's just the awareness of it, right? Like, I know I'm sick. I had a really hard weekend and I've got something coming up. And you're like, okay, if I do 2 days or 3 days now and just recover, I'm good. But if I actually try and push through that, I'll probably make myself sicker for next week.
Yeah.
No, that's
That
so
was
true.
really hard for me in the past, by the way, where just giving myself permission to recover, because in the past guilt would set in until I understood that, recovery is actually training, right? When
Exactly.
you're
And I also
recovering,
think, like, if you're extending that into business, I'd say if you're getting to the point of burnout, you're probably not going to be overly creative.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you two will give me way more on this than I will, but like, whenever I have a lot on my plate and it's overkill, my creativity is zero. Like, I can't think of anything new. But if you give me a week off and I'm on a beach somewhere, I'm like, I have a million ideas by the time I get back.
yeah,
Do you know what I mean? And I always, when I'm thinking of business stuff, like that's kind of one of the things that I'm always cautious of, is not going to too much. And because you need to be able to be creative, especially if you're entrepreneurial like you guys, like, you need to be able to think of new stuff and have a bit of a clear head to do that.
Hey there. We're taking a quick break from the show to let you know that if you'd like to invite Dirain or Nikos to speak at your next event on topics ranging from emergence and the inner game to the future of AI, we've got you covered. Simply email us at info@emergencenowpod.com. Once again, that's info@emergencenowpod.com. Now, let's dive back to the show.
yeah.
Definitely. Flow comes up a lot on our show. Just how do you stay in the pocket? And that's been probably the strongest parallel with sports, is no matter who you are, what you do, what kind of profession you're in, when you're in the pocket, that's it. That's the whole ball game, right? There's nobody else. You don't need to go to the bathroom. You could sit and work for 8 hours a day when you're feeling that swing and you feel like you could crush absolutely everything. Steph Curry putting up 60 points in a game, Kobe putting up 81, things like that, where you're just so dialed in that it doesn't matter. So that's a recurrent theme. Where I want to draw a finer point, though, and both of you can kind of chime in on this because it's super interesting, is I've been having a hard time kind of drawing a stronger parallel between success in sports and success in business, because sports success is very well defined. There are certain leagues and there are levels to those leagues, and you know exactly what you need to land in that pocket. For business, there's just so many trials, tribulations, turns, and everywhere else that, like, you have to do, not just one pivot, but maybe it's two pivots, maybe it's a quarterly pivot. And then you're spread so super thin that sometimes you kind of have decision fatigue, because it's like you're spread all over these different things, that it's not just one thing where it's like, I got to sink that shot. I got to do my swing perfectly. I got to swing and hit it out of the park. That's fairly well defined. So can you guys both comment on that? It's like, there's definitely some parallels in terms of like mindset and overcoming certain things, but there's a level of decisiveness I also feel like you need to just say, hey, I want to be a pro golfer, versus in entrepreneurship, it's a little bit more loosey-goosey, where it's like, I got to do like 5 different hard pivots and then I'll finally find my stride. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I suppose for me, I kind of think of it, I think, the success in business probably is a wider range. And the reason I say that is like you can base it on, I suppose, two things, which is one, probably the obvious one is monetary or size or turnover, whatever way you want to describe it. And then the second is probably your values within that. I think sport is probably more clear cut, and it's just there's a top and that's it. Whereas in business, there's no real top, right? Like you're never going to be the biggest company in the world forever. There's always going to be somebody trying to overtake you or something new that explodes and becomes more expensive. So I suppose with business, it kind of I would say that the success part comes down to the owner's decision on what their value or outcome is, and also if they stick to it. So
Yep.
if your value was that you wanted to be able to look after your family and spend more time with them and less time in work, but you were driving to be the biggest company in the world, I'd probably say the values conflict a bit. And I suppose in a way, the link would be maybe what we were talking about earlier on, where you talk about, somebody like Tiger and Rory. Tiger was willing to do anything to get to the top. Rory kind of isn't. Rory's not willing to sacrifice family a bit. He's willing to be a bit more honest. He's willing to take time off. I think that's kind of probably the difference, right? But most people are just trying to get to the top in sport. Whereas in business, I think there's definitely more examples of people who like, I'm at a nice level here. I quite enjoy this. Like, okay, if it grows, great, but this is kind of where I'm at. And I think it ultimately comes down to the owner or the decision maker. I don't know what you think, Darren.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think, yeah, I agree with you. I think with sports, it's really simple, right? Even though it's really hard, sports success is brutal, but at least it's binary. Like you said, you make the basket or you don't. You win the championship or you don't. You're either on the leaderboard or you're just not, right? So the clarity makes it easier to get in the pocket or to get in the zone because you know exactly what you're optimizing for, right? You train for that,
That's it.
for that one moment, the one skill, the one game situation. Like you talk about Steph Curry, when he's dropping 60 points, he's doing the same thing over and over again. Shoot, score, repeat, comes back to the arena the next day, and the game hasn't really changed. It's more
right.
of a controlled environment, right? In business, it's like playing 10 sports, 10 different sports all at once.
Yeah.
You know, you
Yeah.
now take that clarity and just throw it out the window. I mean, welcome to business. There's no clear win condition. I mean, what does
There's no
winning
finish line, right?
yeah, what does winning
Yeah.
even mean? The game never stops and it's
Right.
always changing. The market dynamics are changing. So there's no off season, there's no timeouts. You're just not doing one thing. You're shooting, you're passing, you're coaching, you're managing, you're fundraising all at the same time while the environment is changing. So it's a completely different animal.
There's
Well, to
also
connect that,
never reset, right? Like you think of
yeah,
sport, like you play golf for a season and then you move up or down a
Yeah.
grade. You play football, you get promoted or relegated. In business,
absolutely.
it keeps rolling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to
Yeah.
connect it back to what you were saying, Jamie, which was really important, by the way, is I think the lesson in that is there's purpose in what you do and there's intent in what you do. And there's freedom in setting your own definitions of what success is as an entrepreneur. And whether or not those goals change because you change as an individual, you still have that definitive moment and you get to decide what that is for you, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it comes back to just the values that you hold as well. I think if you have certain values, you can keep making your way through those kind of stages and achieve success the entire way, whether you're growing or not, but still have kind of great success in your arena. So, even the company that I work for now, Discovery, they're very, very clear on the values that they have. And, you can see that in everything that's done every day in terms of, things like, family is a big one. And their definition of family is not just your family, it's that we're family, and kind of little things that they would do if somebody was sick or if somebody's struggling. Like I always remember last year with the floods and, our outdoor pursuits guys ended up bringing our HR manager because she got stuck in the upstairs of her house. They broke out our canoes and went in and brought some supplies into her. And you're just like, you know what I mean? Like the values are there regardless of how bad the situation is. And I think if a company or a business or an entrepreneur has those things to fall back on, I think it really helps. And obviously everybody's different. And Darren, obviously from our gym, from Inner Fight, you walk in the door, the values are in
Right
blazing
there.
red writing as you
Yeah.
walk in the door, and
Yeah.
they stick to those every single day.
Yeah.
I think it's just defining what it is that's a win for you is probably for you personally is probably the first thing, and then building everything off the back of that.
Yeah, speaking of inner fight and triathlon, I mean, when I think about you, I mean, you see pressure from different dimensions, right? So you see it as a coach, you saw it as a player, and you also see it as a triathlete. I mean, you've trained for Ironmans, and so you're no stranger to pressure. And I want to just bring this back to business. You look at Elon Musk, right? In 2008, both his companies, Tesla and SpaceX, were both circling the drain. So he had this one final rocket situation where there was just this one rocket launch. And if it failed, SpaceX was dead. On the other hand, while this was going on in parallel, if Tesla didn't get funding, game over. So that's pressure. And most people would have played it safe, maybe hedged their bets, or maybe even tapped out. Instead, what he did was he doubled down, right? And now SpaceX is launching rockets like Uber sends cars. Um, so same thing happens in sports, right? Major golf tournaments, you see championship games, an amateur athlete trying to qualify for Kona. Some people just lock in and deliver and others fall apart. Talk to us about what separates the people who thrive under pressure from those who crack.
I think probably the perception of it, and I think when you see the guys who really succeed, they actually love it. Like especially the guys who do it again and again and again under pressure, like they actually love it. And Elon's probably the perfect example because
He's
I remember
addicted to it.
listening. Well, I remember listening to the story after he sold PayPal. I think he sold PayPal. Now I might butcher this story, but he sold PayPal and he used every cent from PayPal to like buy Tesla and something else or put money into it.
Yeah,
And he ended up having not enough money to pay his rent, and he was sleeping on his friend's sofa.
yeah.
And I'm like, for somebody who sold PayPal for God knows how much, it's just such a bizarre all in, right? Like he could easily keep $100,000 aside and put still an ample amount into it, but he didn't. He just went all in, right? And I think when you see it with sports people, it's like, if you're nervous standing on a start line or standing on the first tee, you've got two ways of looking at it. You've got A, oh my God, I'm nervous. This is just going to go so badly and this could happen and that could happen. Or B, you're like, well, I'm nervous because I'm in a position where I could actually do something that I really want to do. So let's go and do it. And, you can do it nervous. And I think that's the thing. Like I always tell my, some of the golfers when they're in the last round, I'm like, okay, if they're close to the lead or leading and they're really nervous, I'm like, well, look, if I gave you the alternative and you're in 40th and there's no pressure on you, would you prefer that? And they all say, no, why would I do that? And I'm like, then you're getting what you want, right? Like you're nervous, but you're in the position you want. So it's all part of the same package. And, I suppose the same goes for business, right? Like take the risk and it pays off big. And if you mess it up, take another risk and hopefully that one will pay off big.
But if you had to codify it, what is it? Is it the fear of not losing, or just that I have nothing to lose mindset, no matter
I don't
what?
think it is. I think it's a willingness to lose. I think they're all aware. Like I don't see a lack of awareness amongst them, and in fact, I think some of the best in the world are probably the most aware people that I've met. But it's just a willingness to go without cursing online. But screw it, let's go. Do you know what I mean? Like let's just roll the dice. I've got one chip left in Vegas. Like put it all on red. And I think it's a willingness to lose it. I don't think it's innate. I think they just are willing to go. Do you know what? I'm all in. Let's go. I think that's really the big difference that I see.
And you talk about awareness. I'm really curious about this. So the very best are aware, but at the same time, no judgment. But we've heard of elite athletes at the top of their game who've dominated for decades, end up making just really poor decisions in spite of being really self-aware, that basically just take their entire career upside down. So what happens to awareness during those moments?
I think it's the same thing. It's just probably flipped on its head, right? Like it's a different scenario of, I'm aware I'm probably doing the wrong thing here, but I'll probably get away with it. I've won in other scenarios where I've rolled the dice and I'll probably win in this one. And then at some point you lose, right? And it just depends on what scale or in what situation you lose in. And it's funny because I'm reading a book at the minute, and they talk about they talk about your values as a leader, and they basically say, like, effectively, if you want to be really good at this, you want to lead with a certain value and a certain value to life. But it is breaking a red light or speeding once or twice. Does that then roll into doing something a little bit bigger and a little bit more wrong, and it just snowballs? And I think when you see these guys, it's kind of a similar scenario where they're willing to take on the biggest risks to get the biggest payoff, but then eventually they take a risk that's just one too far and it crashes down. And Tiger's probably a good example of that, as you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier with that HBO documentary when his wife is smashing in his window with an iron. I think he's lost that battle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably the textbook story that we all think of.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And look, there's tons of them. Like, you go back to Lance, you know what I mean? Like,
that's
it
a good one
probably
too.
started as something small, right? Maybe he did something small to gain an advantage, and then it's because everybody else is doing it, and then he does more, and then he does more, and then he has to defend it, and then he aggressively goes after the reporters, and it's just a snowball, right? It's
Yeah.
it's not one thing. I think it's not an immediate thing. It's just a kind of gradual thing that builds up.
I'm just thinking as a coach, if you have an athlete who goes through something like that, that's a major setback, right? So as a coach, how do you handle setbacks when one of your players don't do well? That's got to be challenging for you because you're emotionally are you emotionally invested in your athletes?
Oh, massively.
Yeah. So how do you deal
I
with
actually remember one of my girls was she was about to win a tournament, and I was watching it on TV, and she messed up one hole, and I remember throwing a remote at the TV, and I broke the TV. And so you're 100% emotionally invested in every, and even on the phone, because obviously sometimes they're not televised, so you're just scrolling and you see one hole. It's like dot watching. You just see one hole appear at a time, and you're like up, 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 and then it's like, throw the phone. But I think to answer your question, how do you deal with it? I think you try and move forward in some way, and what that forward looks like is completely individual to the person and the situation. It might be, if it's really bad, just getting them out of bed the next morning and just getting them to the golf course, and it can build from there. And you've just got to. I always like the accumulation of good days, which a friend of mine, Carl Morris, kind of, I suppose, labeled or tagged. But effectively, what you're trying to do is just build a good day. You know what I mean? And I remember with a girl that I used to work with who had severe, anxiety problems and stuff. I remember our good day started with, like, it was like you had to, write down your to dos, which was basically one of her to dos done already. She had to eat breakfast and she had to get dressed, and that was like a win for the day. And we had to build off something that small. And I think, as I said, it goes different for everybody, but I think whenever you've had a big setback, effectively you've just got to move forward in some way. Now, the forward might not be what the forward was last week, but forward is forward, and whether it's a small step or a big step, it's just got to move in a direction.
Yeah.
Because if you're dropped in the middle of the woods and you just stand still, you're going to die. So you have to move to try and figure out whether you're moving the right way or the wrong way, but you've got to move. I think that's the biggest thing.
Why do you think people fail at consistency? I mean, everyone says that they want to be consistent, but let's be honest, most people are not very good at being consistent, right? So, I mean, let's just go back to parenting. Like, take parenting. One day it's, no screens before bed, but the next day, if mom and dad are tired, then, if they're too tired to fight the battle, the kids are on the iPad or they get a free pass. So, how do you think about, like, what's the secret? What's the unlock around just being consistent and staying consistent?
I suppose I find two things very helpful. I find breaking it down very useful into something smaller, and then also just an accountability factor to it, but also giving yourself a little bit of a break within that. So, like, if you use the parenting one, if let's say a New Year's resolution was for them to not use an iPad every single day, and you guys as parents have a piece of paper with a chart sitting on the back of your bedroom door, and every night you either mark it in red or mark it in green, depending on positive or negative. And if you get to the end of the week and it's 5-2, positive, you've won. And I think it's making it that simple, right? Like, and if you're 3 days into the week and you've got 3 reds on the board, then you better be a bit strict the last 4 days of the week. Otherwise, you're going to lose the week. And you start to accumulate, good things. So in that scenario, it's like, okay, well, you've got a one box at a time to fill. I think when people set out big goals and they don't break it down, it's very difficult to see the finish line. And even looking back on, the Ironman that I did, and, I seen you do it last year. I don't know if you get this, but I look back on the training I did and I'm like, how the hell did I do it?
All the time.
But then when I look at it at the time, it's like it kind of creeps up on you because they're just adding a little bit on every week. So it's like, okay, a 70K ride. Okay, you got 75K next week. Okay, you've got 80, and you're doing that with a bit of running, and you're doing that with a little bit of swimming. And before you know it, it's normal, right? Each week is just a little bit more. So yeah, I think with people with bigger goals and stuff like that, it's like, okay, if you set the big one, that's great. Like by all means, whether it's lose a ton of weight, whether it's, complete an ultra endurance race or whatever, but have markers along the way that allow you to kind of feel like you're constantly achieving and it's not just one big achievement at the end. And then also give yourself a break. Like if you have one fail within, 5 or 6, then fine. It's allowed. You're allowed to mess up. Don't persecute yourself. Just try and win the next day and try and again move forward. It's one of the simplest things you can do is just win the next day, and you keep winning the next day. Eventually, it adds up.
Just showing up, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of consistency.
I think it was Mark Manson said it. I think it was him that said it in his book. It was either him or it was Atomic Habits, but they described it like a vote. They were like, "Look, you don't have to win every vote. You just got to win more than the other guy."
Yeah.
And I kind of think about that with training. I'm like, look, you're not going to win every training session or every parenting decision or every whatever. But if you win more than the other guy, you're like, okay, I'm on a positive. Like, that's all I can keep doing.
Yeah. Reminds me of this meme of two guys running and there's a lion behind them. And the guy says, I don't need to outrun. What did he say? I don't need to outrun the lion. I just need to outrun you.
Yeah, exactly. But it's relative. Like if you can get your head around that, I think that's a big one. It's like with work, like even with work at the moment, we've got a million tasks to do. And like the other day, I was listening to somebody, and he kind of said, "Okay, have 2 priorities a day. So if you've got a task of 50, pick the 2 most important ones, just put them to the top. If you get those done, brilliant. If you get 10 done, even better. But they're your 2 priorities, and then next day, set 2 more. And it's just breaking it down into smaller chunks sometimes."
Yeah. I like the whole gamification as a cheat code for self-discipline.
I think it's my competitiveness. I think it just naturally comes out.
Because most people struggle with discipline, right? Just the word discipline's a bit, it's a heavy word.
Yeah.
Because I think, at least I used to rely on feelings instead of systems. But when I turn discipline into a game, suddenly, hard things feel fun and you start seeing progress, and then you just get hooked on winning. You just get hooked on showing up, right?
Yeah. And it's funny, you get in that run then, right? Like you get 4 or 5 or 6 wins in a row, and then you lose when you're like, now I've got to be like, get back on the winning streak. You're right. The gamification really changes your mindset on it, right?
And what do you mean by accountability? Do you think that's an important ingredient in the equation? What if someone's listening and they don't have someone who holds them accountable?
Yeah, like it's interesting. I find accountability, I suppose you can have it 2 ways, and I've kind of done it several different ways in the past. But I suppose the first way is like I start through a coach, right? Like I've always had coaches in various different things, like from the endurance stuff we do to having a psychologist I can speak to all these just mentors. And I think when you use people like that, they teach you the systems.
Yeah.
And then once you know the systems, the accountability is kind of on yourself. Now, I kind of look at it like I should be able to, if I have the information and I have the system that they've given me, even without them, I should be able to at least follow something similar. And then if I really, really am struggling, then I will probably rehire somebody to help me with it and try and get me back in a run. So like nutritionist is a good example. In the build up to Roth, I used one every single day for 6 months and counted everything. And like to me now, I know the information and I should be able to apply it. If I really feel like I'm struggling, or I've gone too far in the wrong direction, then I'll hire him to just give me a telling off when I need a telling off and keep me a bit more accountable. But I also find writing stuff down keeps me accountable to myself.
Yeah.
When I have like I say, with that priority list, if I have those two in red at the top as a high priority at the beginning of a day, if they're not green by the end of the day, I get quite annoyed. And it's that nobody sees it, nobody knows I do it. It's just to myself. Same with journaling. If I put a couple of things down that I want to achieve, like I think I'm good with tasks. I think they really help me through the year, like having goals set at the beginning of a year. And I'm good with trying to tick off those tasks. But I'm actually, in a way, a little afraid of if I never did that, like I don't actually know what would happen. I could just run wild. And I think that's just a bit of self-awareness in that, like, if I don't have some sort of system or plan in place, I could go any direction.
Yeah. I work with coaches as well, and specifically there's actually someone in my life who's been mentoring me for the last 4 years, and we took a break in the last 6 months, and I could tell that things drifted a bit, and then we reinstated, or we got back on track, and I noticed an instant shift just knowing that there's an entry in my calendar 1 month from now where I'm going to be asked about certain things that I committed to, and I'm going to have to be able to respond, whether I got it done, if there was progress, if it's on track or not, and if it's not on track, why not. Was It just created this element of awareness, a higher level. Nix, what do you think of accountability? Do you think you need an accountability partner? What's your view on
100%.
that?
Absolutely. I mean, that goes hand in hand with consistency and the discipline that you had mentioned, because it's super easy to veer off and change things. And if you're not rigorous, and I myself know that I've had to develop this over time, in that the consistency and discipline is one thing. The fire in the belly is like a whole other thing. And then things change, right? Circumstances change, and you may not be the same person, or you may not want the same things. But then you often find new ways to find that flow. Like, Jamie, you're the perfect example of still staying in the pocket and shifting gears to do still what you love, and then finding a new dial that says, wow, that dopamine hit every time I help somebody do their thing. So then you become the catalyst for somebody else. But yeah, that all goes hand in hand. I think that's a perfect encapsulation for you maintaining that consistency, and you also being able to achieve new levels as a result of that consistency and accountability. So it seems to be crystallizing around this one big idea of intent, accountability, and consistency leads to those breakthroughs.
Yeah.
Do you guys find that you keep each other accountable on the podcast? Because it's not easy to pop them out it's not easy to pop them out frequently and regularly, right? Like, it must be, especially being in two very different time zones.
Totally. Nix, what do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Deeran keeps me more accountable than I keep him accountable. I feel like I've been tougher to pin down for numerous reasons.
Jamie, so coaching, it's not just a job for you. It's personal, right? So you invest in people, as you said, you're emotionally invested. And when you're emotionally invested, you're riding the highs with them, but you also feel the lows. As you said, you chuck that remote, at the TV. But what most people don't see is the cost on you, right? So let me ask you, what's been the hardest part of this journey for you personally? Like, what's the hardest part about being Jamie? Not just as a coach, but Jamie as the person.
I think my hardest task is always getting a balance to what I do. I'm not a great person at being quiet with stuff. Whether that, finding a balance to my plate almost is probably the most difficult. So obviously, when I worked with Claude and Butch at my previous academy, it's pretty full on. Like, you're probably 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. just teaching flat out. And then now I'm with a company where it's much more based on, just the quality and giving 100% energy, effort to the person in front of you. And you've got a buffer of time around that. You're not going lesson to lesson. But then you end up taking on something like a master's on the other side of it. So, for me, I suppose I've learned it the harder way sometimes, is not to try and do too much. So I had to de-emphasize things like training. I'm like, I do a lot more of it for fun, and you pick 1 or 2 races a year. But at the end of the day, if I don't deprioritize that, then my relationship goes out the window. And it's this really tough balance. And I think anybody, every person probably has to create that balance. And I think some are just better at it than others. It's definitely not a strength of mine. I can promise you that. Like if you said work 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day, I'd probably do it. You know what I mean? It takes a lot for me to pull back. So, it's been lovely with the company that I've started with now. It's been really, really nice to get home at a respectable time most of the time. And it just gives you an hour or 2 extra, to do other stuff. And I think that's been really important for me recently. But then that takes me a little bit away from the high performance side of things, because my current role is not working with a lot of high performing athletes, because it's a private club. So I get to deal with the members and that's it. So it's always that, it's almost like an angel on one shoulder going, you should be working harder. You should be doing more of this. You should be doing more of this. And then the devil is on the other shoulder going, do you know what? You're in a really good place right now. You've got a lovely kind of cadence to things, and you've got a little more flexibility than you normally would. And you've got a great team around you. Like, enjoy it. Like you've earned it in a way. And I think that's always in my head, that's a really difficult thing. Just getting the balance and just saying that like where you're at is fine. Like enjoy it for now. And if you want to change it, you can change it. But where you're at is good.
And I have to tell you, I mean, I think the way you show up and, you articulate your thoughts is very consistent with, I mean, there's just a lot of positivity in what I hear you say. I think that's very consistent with how you show up. I mean, we've been part of the same community for a number of years, but I've only really gotten to know you in the last 2. And the catalyst to that was, I don't know if you remember, but I put up a message on our group chat, and there's about 100 athletes on that group chat, saying that, I'm short for some nutrition, and I had a race coming up. And there's this specific nutrition that you and I both enjoy called precision hydration. And I put a message up, and you were the first person to respond saying, and I didn't even really know you. I mean, I knew of you. We knew of each other. But you were the first one to respond saying, yep, got a stack. I'll bring it tomorrow. Don't worry, you're sorted. And I remember you showed up the next day and you just handed it to me. I mean, you bring that positivity to the community as you do to your coaching from everything that I've heard. I mean, we know a mutual friend as well who you've coached for a number of years. So Jamie, this has been amazing. Let's wrap it up with this. If you could give one piece of advice unrelated to sports or business, that's had a massive impact on your life, what would it be?
I think you'll laugh at this, because I, as much as this was based around triathlon, I actually think about it in many other ways. I remember before doing the first 70.3 in Dubai, I got a message from our good friend Jeff, and the message was basically, tomorrow, one arm over the other, one pedal over the other, and then one foot over the other. And he said, you'll reach the finish line. And I kind of always think about that whenever anything is difficult. And I think that goes for everything through life. I think just taking it one step at a time and keep moving forward, and you'll get there eventually.
Beautiful.
Love it.
All right. That's a wrap. We'll catch you guys in the next episode.
Thank you for tuning in to Emergence Now, where we explore the emerging trends, technologies, and ideas that are shaping our world today for you to discover yourself. We hope you enjoyed this episode and gained valuable insights that you can apply in your own life. If you want to stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And don't forget to follow us on social media, where we share additional content, engage with our community, and keep the conversation going. Thanks again for listening to Emergence Now, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode.